Chapter 11 The Crown Prince's Guards. You are listening at novelfull.audio. This ain't right, Joseph muttered, frowning. Are the gangs in St. Anthony's gone completely nuts? He immediately told Alden, effective immediately, everyone's on extended hours. I want double the usual performance, and night patrols especially need to be beefed up. Something's brewing. Yes, sir. Alden snapped a salute and was about to leave when the officer in charge of personnel came running in, sweating bullets. Your Highness, we've got a flood of leave requests, pushing 100 guys. 100? Alden was floored. St. Anthony's had a total of about 400 people, including everyone from the main police force to the support staff. That meant a quarter of the department was trying to bail. Yeah, claiming sickness, family emergencies, the works. Joseph grabbed the leave request list and scanned it. It was all the same cops, mostly logistics, and a dozen or so detectives, and the ringleader of this mass exodus was none other than Bono, the police station's second-in-command. Joseph's eyes narrowed. With all the recent trouble, he'd just announced a crackdown, and now this? Too convenient. Something fishy was going on, Arden said anxiously. Your Highness, we're already short-handed. What about them? Joseph turned and handed the list to his valet. Emin, have a doctor verify every single one of these. Anyone caught faking it is fired. End of story. Yes, Your Highness. Think you can pull a fast one? Joseph smirked. Cutting salary expenses. A couple hundred guys. You think I can't handle that? He instructed Arden, Magoni, and the other security inspectors to lead teams and maintain order. Then he nodded to the captain of the Crown Prince's Guard, who was standing a respectful distance away. Viscount Zord, how many of my guards do we have here? 105 men, Your Highness. On the surface, Joseph was only ever accompanied by 2 or 3 guards, but actually, within 300 meters, there was a large number of Crown Prince's guards on duty at any time. Deploy 90 of them to patrol the streets with Magoni's crew to keep the peace. Your Highness, Quixote replied stiffly, that's against regulations. Rules are made to be broken. Besides, you're my guards. You listen to me, got it? Joseph smiled. Quixote's face was a mask of military stoicism. Your Highness, our duty is to protect you. I can't see His Majesty the King approving this. His Majesty the King. Joseph's smile turned sly. He took a letter from Louis XVI from the drawer and handed the last page to the stubborn captain. I've got the King's approval right here. Ah. Quixote said, surprised. Joseph pointed to the text. Just let it go. If there's a problem, I'll deal with it. That's His Majesty's signature. You're to follow those instructions. Quixote was stunned. But. Joseph leaned in. If you don't listen to me, I'll personally lead the patrol. You heard about the situation out there. Absolutely not. Quixote exclaimed. After a tense moment, he finally relented, but with a pained expression. Your Highness, Major Faison can't find out about this. Also, you're not to leave the police station. Faison was the captain of the palace guard at Versailles and Quixote's direct superior. Deal. Joseph nodded. Relax. I'm keeping 15 men here with me. I'll be fine. Quixote saluted again, left Joseph's office, and marched to the open space outside the police station. He pulled a whistle from his pocket and blew 2 sharp blasts. Instantly, over 100 of the Crown Prince's guards materialized from all directions, weapons at the ready, and formed 5 neat columns. Quixote signaled for several officers to step forward and gave them quiet instructions. Yes, sir. The officers shouted, then led their men out of the police station at a run. The contingent included 10 cavalrymen in a dilapidated house in the Huaik neighborhood, reeking of foot odor and sour vomit. Several leaders of the Black Sheep gang were laughing and carousing. Those Bayuigue girls are good, but St. Anthony's ain't bad. The leader took a swig of wine and scoffed at the man. Amateur. For real pros, it's the Louvre area. 30 livres a night, and those breasts. A man with half an ear missing grunted, we made 2,000 livres the last few days. We'll be partying with the high-end girls in the Louvre now, right? Someone laughed. Varian, your high-class cousin lost all his money at the casino, 150 livres, right? You must have pissed it away, Half-ear grabbed a copy of the Paris News, burped, and retorted, see this? My burning of the shoe store is in the paper. That crooked cop Similian will give me 1,000 livres tomorrow. We'll have plenty to blow at the Technical Institute. Look at you, the big leader said, pointing at the men with his wine bottle. You think all it takes is a prostitute? Work hard for me. Win the 20,000 livres, and I'll take you to the real thing. Noble girls, that the gang members' eyes widened, and they whooped in unison. You got it, boss. The Haas gang doesn't stand a chance. That 20 grand is ours. I'll get someone to do it tomorrow. Since Similian had promised 1,000 livres for every major crime committed 3 days prior, the Black Sheep gang had been issuing death orders with heavy bonuses, creating chaos at any cost. Plenty of the young men had been arrested by the police, but they had also made a fortune. The gang leaders were so preoccupied with thoughts of money and power that they didn't fall asleep until late. The next morning, a pounding on the door jolted them awake. Boss! Boss! Bad news. One of our guys is dead. The big leader sat up, massaging his aching head. What's all the yelling? Just some dead nobody. Who did it? The Haas gang? The cops? Neither, the voice outside trembled. It was the Royal Guard. And 3 people died. Royal Guards. The big leader frowned and kicked his man. Get up. Let's go see what happened. Cursing, the 2 leaders followed the man with a few of their guys. They didn't have to go far. Across the street, they saw a troop of Royal Guards approaching, their uniforms impeccable, their feathered hats immaculate, their royal crests gleaming. What are they doing in St. Anthony's? Half-ear asked nervously. Looks like they're keeping the peace, the messenger said grimly. There's a ton of them, almost on every street. Chapter 12 Clues, please vote. You are listening at novelfull.audio. While the Black Sheep gang was shooting the breeze, they heard what sounded like a mugging nearby. The Royal Guards rushed over, yelling, freeze. We're authorized to shoot. The 2 Hoth gang thugs ignored them, slashed their victim, and bolted down an alley without a backward glance. These weren't your average, under-equipped cops. These Royal Guards were decked out with muskets and breastplates. They lined up, aiming their weapons. The leader shouted again, last warning. Get down. One robber flipped them off, cackled like a maniac, and ran even faster. They figured as long as they ran hard and looked confident, the cops couldn't do squat. This time, though, they were dealing with France's elite. Fire. The leader barked the order, and 5 muskets blasted at once. The 2 gangsters went down hard, riddled with bullet holes the size of your palm, blood gushing everywhere. The Black Sheep gang guys watched, their necks snapping back like turtles retreating into their shells. Spooked by the pinpoint accuracy and cold-blooded dispatching, they exchanged nervous glances, ditched their dead buddy without a second thought, and raced back to tell the boss. The Dauphin Guards steamrolled through the Saint-Antoine district. By 10 in the morning, they'd put 6 gang members in the ground. The 2 gangs, so cocky and troublesome just days before, suddenly went quiet. It was Joseph's order, any crime, any resistance, and the perp gets shot. Drastic times, drastic measures. A little bloodletting was needed to keep the gangs in check. Who cared about the rights of some low-life criminals? This wasn't a feel-good fairy tale. The Hoth gang leader peeked through the curtains of his hideout, watching the towering Royal Guards patrol the streets. Their presence made his skin crawl. Every few minutes, a knock on the door brought news of another arrest or execution. He'd lost 17 guys that day, and it felt like a knife twisting in his gut. I'm just a two-bit hood. Do I need to raise an army just to survive? The Black Sheep gang was quicker on the uptake. They pulled their guys off the streets at noon, only losing about 10 for 2 straight days. The St. Anthony district was squeaky clean. Semillion's payoff was tempting, but the royal guards were too damn ruthless. No amount of money was worth that kind of heat. Word of the gang's retreat trickled back to the police station. Everyone was pumped, praising the Crown Prince's grit and tactics, and the royal guard's intimidating force. Joseph wasn't buying into the hype. He knew the guards had only scared the gangs for now. It wouldn't be long before they found a way around it. The guards didn't know the streets like the back of their hand, and they sure as hell didn't know anything about investigating crimes. Besides, most of the guards were knights. Keeping them pounding the pavement would kill their morale faster than you could say French Revolution. You can't be ready to defend against a thief forever. If they didn't nail the mastermind pulling the strings, it was only a matter of time before things blew up again. Public Security Inspector Arden knocked and entered, saluting, "Your Highness, we've interrogated everyone we caught. They're all small fry. But a lot of them mentioned that the bosses got paid 1,000 livres for every job, and then they shared the loot." Joseph frowned. Someone was bankrolling these crimes. 1,000 livres a pop. This guy was playing for keeps. He told Arden to dig deeper, then noticed a guard officer hurrying in, saluting sharply. "Your Highness, we just picked up a guy named Valian. His ID seems like it's something." "Valian?" Arden practically shouted, "He's the Black Sheep gang's second in command." "How did you nab him?" The officer explained, "He was brawling at the casino. When we showed up, he tried to bolt. My guys shot 3 of his crew. He only gave himself up to save his own hide." Arden swallowed, feeling a twinge of sympathy for the gangsters, before turning to Joseph. "Your Highness, Valian probably knows something. I'll go question him immediately." Less than an hour later, Magoni burst in, still splattered with blood, and handed Joseph a statement. "Your Highness, you're not going to believe what we found out." Joseph read how the Black Sheep gang leader had confessed that a man named Raymond was paying them to stir up trouble, 1,000 livres for each successful job. At the end of the month, whichever gang, the Sheep or the Hoth, had caused the most chaos would get an extra 2,000. He frowned. "What does this Raymond do?" Arden shook his head, but the police clerk piped up, "He's Mr. Semillion's cousin." "Semillon?" The name rang a bell for Joseph. The clerk clarified, "He used to be the police commissioner in this district." Suddenly, it all clicked. No wonder half the police force had called in sick at the same time. Their old boss was behind it, and everything made sense. Arden, having come up through the ranks from civilian patrol, didn't get all the ins and outs. He looked at Joseph, waiting for instructions. "Your Highness, do you want to arrest Semillon?" Joseph hesitated, then asked the clerk, "What did Semillon make when he was commissioner?" "About 30 livres a month, Your Highness." "Was he from a wealthy family?" "No, Your Highness. Mr. Semillion's father was a small civil servant, a pretty ordinary background." Joseph's eyes narrowed. At that rate, it would take him over 50 years to save 20,000 livres. Where did he get that kind of money? Arden's eyes widened. "What are you getting at?" Joseph said slowly, "There's someone else behind him." Arden considered that. "Your Highness, I remember Valian saying that Raymond showed them a deposit slip for 20,000 livres to prove he could pay. It was from Havre Bank. That could be the key." Joseph nodded, pulled out a map, and saw that Havre was a small bank with just 2 branches in Paris. "Viscount Emin, you and Arden." He paused, then shook his head. "Never mind. I'd better go myself." At Havre Bank, closer to City Hall, the manager initially refused to let Joseph inspect the account. Only when Joseph revealed his identity and threatened to bring in the secret police did the manager cave. Semillion's transactions were simple enough. A draft for 30,000 livres was cashed, and then the money was divvied up and deposited. with one chunk being exactly 20,000 livres, Joseph grimaced. People back then weren't exactly financial geniuses. He had the info he needed. The guy who paid the draft was Vicomte Guizot, the Paris police chief. This book has so few reviews. I hope you like it. Please leave some comments. I want to communicate with you all. Chapter 13 Transaction. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Joseph left 2 guards to watch the bank manager, making sure he didn't spill the beans, and led everyone out of Havre Bank. Arden, clearly agitated, said, "Your Highness, I'll have Guizot arrested." Joseph stopped him with a raised hand. Guizot only gave Similian 30,000 livres. We don't have any real proof he was involved. Then let's arrest Similian. Maybe he'll crack and rat out Guizot. Joseph hadn't expected the Paris police chief to be the mastermind. He frowned, lost in thought. Guizot's position made things complicated. Without more than just Similian's word, it would be tough to get a conviction if he denied everything. Iman, noticing the fading light, said to Joseph, "Your Highness, it's getting late. We should head back." That gave Joseph an idea. Valien was arrested right before dark, right? So the news shouldn't reach City Hall until tomorrow morning, right? Arden nodded. He's just a 2-bit thug. Nobody cares about him. Good. Joseph hopped into the carriage, leaned over a small table, and quickly scribbled a note. He handed it to the captain of the guard. "Viscount Cassade, send someone back to the palace of Versailles ASAP with this for the Queen." "Yes, Your Highness." At 4 in the morning, Count Hermann, Queen Marie's secretary, and Antoine, the head of the secret police, arrived at the Saint Antoine district police station, both yawning. Before they could even exchange greetings, Joseph greeted them warmly with hot cocoa and pulled them into chairs. "Your Highness, you sounded so urgent. What's so important?" "I need a favor from you both," Joseph said, leaning forward and outlining his plan. Hermann's eyes widened. "If this goes wrong, leave it to me." "No slip-ups," Antoine said confidently. "Your Highness's idea is brilliant. I'm adding this to the secret police training program." Joseph bowed to them. "Then I'll leave it in your capable hands." "It's our honor to serve Your Highness." At dawn, Guizot, still half asleep, climbed into his carriage. He tossed his cane to the servant and waved dismissively. "Let's go." The carriage started with a lurch, bumping along the cobblestones. Guizot's house was a ways from City Hall. He was about to settle in for a nap when the coachman yelled a sudden whoa. And the carriage screeched to a halt. "What's going on?" Guizot snapped, opening the window to see what the commotion was, but the door was yanked open. 3 burly guys in ripped leather hats and black armor, reeking of stale sweat, stood outside. Guizot's bodyguard went for his sword, but a dussac knife pressed against his throat stopped him cold. A gaunt man with bony knuckles shook his head from outside the carriage and said in a gravelly voice, "Everybody out." The servants and bodyguards scrambled out. Guizot started to move, but was pinned down. "Don't even think about it." Then, 3 thugs jumped into the carriage. The man with the knife closed the door and said to the coachman, "Keep driving. Act normal." As the carriage lurched back into motion, the fear vanished from Guizot's face. He leaned back and said coldly, "Valien. Who sent you?" As the Paris police chief, he recognized some of the city's notorious gang leaders. The guy in the middle with a missing chunk of his left ear, was the Black Sheep gang's second-in-command. He'd met him once last year. Valien glanced at the thin, middle-aged man sitting on the left, lowered his head, and mumbled, Let my guy talk to you." The thin man rubbed his stubbly chin with the blade, glanced sideways at Guizot, and said, "Mr. Guizot, our boss wants to make you an offer." "You?" Guizot scoffed. "What makes you think you can make me an offer?" "Get out of my carriage." The thin man ignored him, continuing as if Guizot hadn't spoken. "That 20,000 livres, you'll regret not listening." Guizot drawled, 20,000 livres. I have no idea what you're talking about. Why play coy? The thin man grinned. Semillion got drunk with our boss at the Technical Academy and spilled a lot of secrets, like the assignment you gave him. That idiot. Guizot muttered, turning to look out the window. Whatever it is, take it up with Semillion. Nah, he's out of the loop on this. The boss wants you to pay us the 20,000 directly. Guizot looked amused. Are you out of your mind? Well, ever since a bunch of royal guards showed up in St. Anthony, nobody wants to cause trouble there. Guizot's expression changed slightly. So what Semillion asked for is gonna be tough to pull off, for us or the Hoth gang. The thin man held up 2 fingers. But our boss still wants those 20,000 livres. Guizot smirked. You want money for doing nothing? No, not nothing, the thin man said. We'll do something big, something worth 20 grand, and then call it quits. Guizot was intrigued. He'd heard rumors about the royal guards cracking down on gangs in Saint-Antoine and was worried about it. This was interesting. What are you going to do? What are our plans? The thin man shook his head. No, it's what you want us to do. Guizot dropped the pretense and said with a wolfish grin, if you can pull off something that shames the cops in Saint-Antoine, something that lands on the front page of every newspaper, something that every Parisian will be talking about for a year. I might consider handing over 20,000 livres directly. The thin man thought for a moment. How about we sneak into the police station in St. Anthony, kill 10 cops, and burn the place to the ground? What do you say? That's ambitious, Guizot said, rubbing his chin, a smile playing on his lips. Burn down the police station? How would the Crown Prince feel then? The city commissioner would be more than pleased. Do it. The thin man nodded, repeating carefully, let's make sure we're clear. You're paying us 20,000 livres to kill 10 cops and burn down the police station. Is that correct? Guizot thought the phrasing was a bit odd, but the gist was right. Figuring it was just some dumb thug mangling the words, he nodded almost imperceptibly, yeah, that's it. Nobody's forcing you into this, right? What? Of course not. The thin man raised his eyes, staring at him with a smile. I'm just curious, Mr. Guizot, why would you spend so much money to do something that's completely pointless? Guizot's face darkened. You idiot. That's none of your business. Now get out of my carriage and go back to St. Anthony and do what you're supposed to do. All right, time to get down to business. The thin man smiled and pocketed the dussac knife. He ripped off his ragged leather hat, tore off his fake beard, and then produced a set of shiny iron handcuffs, shaking them at Guizot. Guizot, you're suspected of conspiring to murder police officers, burn down the police station, and threaten the safety of the Crown Prince. I'm formally arresting you in the name of the Royal Police. The Royal Police was just a fancy name for the secret police, which was basically the equivalent of the FBI in the future. They had serious power, including the right to make arrests. Chapter 14 Closing the Net. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Guizot's face went rigid. He glared at Valien. Get your people under control. What is he blathering about? The carriage lurched to a halt. Valien offered a smile that looked more like a grimace and shifted slightly, revealing a dagger pressed against Guizot's back. Guizot's pupils constricted. He bolted upright, reaching for the door handle, but the skinny guy was too quick. Before Guizot could even lift his butt from the seat, the guy's hand was clamped around his neck, shoving him back against the seat. Guizot struggled wildly, screaming, "Let me go. I'm the Paris police chief. You can't arrest me without proof." The quiet man on Valien's right spoke up. I, Ambrose de Herman, acting on behalf of Her Majesty the Queen, witnessed everything. I can attest to your guilt. The carriage door swung open. Arden and a cop pointed their guns at Guizot. I was driving, Arden snarled. We heard it all. We'll both testify, Guizot immediately caved. In the St. Anthony District Police Station's courtyard, Joseph watched a stream of officers rush past, nodding at them. They responded with booming slogans. Arden was still buzzing with excitement, recounting the morning's events to the Crown Prince. Antoine's men were waiting around the corner and snatched Guizot. I think they took him to the Royal Police interrogation room. Then I followed another team to search Guizot's place. I noticed some weird bulges on the headboard. I had a hunch, so we smashed it open and found a hidden compartment. Joseph, who had already heard the story, smiled. And you found the notebook. You really did a bang-up job this time. Guizot's notes contained information about the major gangs and a bunch of murderers in the St. Anthony district. The last few pages documented Guizot's protection racket, showing how he took bribes from these guys. Joseph immediately mobilized every police officer under his command, coordinating with his own guards to launch a planned assault on the criminals' lairs. Chaos erupted in the St. Anthony district. Gang members and thugs were caught completely off guard, scrambling through the streets. They were quickly wrestled to the ground and restrained, and those who resisted got a face full of lead. The roundup lasted 2 days. Hearing the news, residents wisely stayed home to let the police do their jobs. Some brave souls even armed themselves with bats and helped intercept fleeing criminals at street corners. The St. Anthony police station cells filled up fast. Additional offenders were sent to the Bastille. The massive operation drew reporters from all over Paris. On White Iris Street, a middle-aged man with messy hair, deep lines etched around his mouth, and a perpetually contemplative expression, frowned, observing the scene across the road. A group of royal guards was marching 7 or 8 downcast individuals, hands bound, sporting bloody noses and mouths. The young man beside him said anxiously, "Mr. Marat, you really shouldn't be here in person. It seems pretty dangerous." "Nonsense," Marat waved him off. "You can't know the truth without seeing it for yourself." He hurried into a grocery store, bought something random, and pointed toward the royal guards. "Know what's going on? Arresting political prisoners." The shopkeeper rolled his eyes. "Political prisoners? Those tied up are Viper Gang goons. They've never done an honest thing in their lives." He rolled up his sleeve, revealing a scar. "See this? The Viper Gang did this last year. Before the Crown Prince brought in the new police squad, they were shaking me down for 5 livres every month. God bless the Crown Prince. Now these creeps are finally getting what they deserve. Now I can buy some butter for my kids." Marat mechanically pulled out his notebook and started scribbling. "Tell me about this new police squad." "Sure thing." The shopkeeper put down his work and turned to him. "Are you a reporter? Hey, can you print my thanks to the Crown Prince in the paper?" Sure, why not?" After a lengthy conversation filled with praise for the Crown Prince, Marat left the grocery store, a bit bewildered. He stopped a passerby on the street and asked what the police and guards were doing. He got the same answer as the shopkeeper. After interviewing 7 or 8 people in a row, checking with the security booth on White Iris Street, and even grilling one of the arrested thugs, he began to believe the royal family had actually done something genuinely beneficial for the people. It was downright weird. In his experience, the royals and nobles always just exploited and abused everyone. The idea of the royal family getting rid of problems without passing the costs on to the public was unheard of, but he prided himself on sticking to the facts. Armed with a ton of first-hand accounts, he rushed back to his hotel and wrote the headline for tomorrow's story: Crown Prince's police reforms a resounding success, criminal underworld of St. Anthony district decimated in one fell swoop. A string of drab carriages rumbled along the north bank of the Seine River toward the Palace of Versailles. In the middle carriage, Joseph coughed, feeling like he was riding a jackhammer. He rubbed his throbbing forehead. "We need to get some spring shock absorbers, and tires would be even better. We're going to be doing a lot of horse-drawn carriage rides, so we need to fix this." Yesterday, he'd received a commendation from the cabinet, praising his success in wiping out the criminals of the St. Anthony district and requesting that he return to the Palace of Versailles to report on his progress. The letter was signed by the king and queen. Joseph smiled wryly to himself. A progress report a little over 3 weeks after starting the job. That was a record. Probably just Shirley and the queen missing their son and looking for an excuse to see him. But this fit his own plans perfectly. Joseph had no intention of remaining the police chief forever. His main goal was always to save France's finances and prevent the country from going bankrupt and being overrun by a mob. He could use the wave of good press to ask the Queen for the position of assistant to the Minister of Finance and see what objections the cabinet members might have. Come to think of it, he should thank Guizot for creating the situation in St. Anthony's district. If Guizot hadn't spent tens of thousands of livres to stir up trouble, he wouldn't have been able to launch the anti-gang evil campaign that had gripped the whole of Paris. Joseph glanced at the documents in his hand. They were Guizot's confession and interrogation records from the royal police. He had learned that his reorganization of the police force had impacted the police department's ability to sell positions for profit, which had triggered Guizot's insane revenge. Fueled by those 20,000 livres, the gang members in the St. Anthony district had killed over a dozen citizens, injured many more. And the situation had almost spun out of control. Joseph took a deep breath. If Simulayan hadn't been oblivious to financial investigations, he'd be in deep trouble, and the police reform could have been dead in the water. Chapter 15 Political Capital. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Joseph felt a knot of fear tighten in his stomach. Rectifying France meant potentially stepping on the toes of powerful groups, bureaucrats, nobles, the church, capitalists, even foreign powers. A misstep could unleash a furious backlash. In short, he anticipated a barrage of Guizot-style dirty tricks, attacks he might not even see coming. How could he avoid becoming a pawn in their game? He gazed out the window, tapping his fingers on the seat's armrest, lost in thought. The best way to avoid being blindsided was to identify threats early, to get a sense of what plots were brewing against him. Ideally, he'd have a team of professionals to nip these threats in the bud. To do that, he'd need eyes and ears everywhere, gathering information, and a command center, analyzing the data, devising response plans, and deploying people to handle the problems. The names CIA, KGB, MI6 flashed in his mind. An intelligence agency like that would be his shield against the machinations of his enemies, ensuring his reforms wouldn't be derailed. France already had a secret police force, of course, but Joseph knew they were useless, peeking at letters, eavesdropping on conversations, spying without any real direction. Even those simple tasks they bungled, getting caught and earning the secret police a terrible reputation. Building his own intelligence team was the only reliable option. He could train them with cutting-edge techniques, instill loyalty, but France was already up in arms over the existing secret police. Creating another one would be like painting a target on his back. Joseph frowned. How could he stay under the radar? And where would he find the right people? It was a lonely position, lacking political capital. The more he thought, the more his head throbbed, triggering a cough. He smiled wryly and shook his head. His chronic pneumonia flared up easily. The less than ideal food and lodging in St. Anthony district had brought it back. He needed to make physical exercise a priority. The carriage began to slow. Joseph turned to Imang. Are we there? Not yet, Your Highness. The attendant leaned out the window. What's going on? A guard hurried back from the lead carriage, chest heaving. Your Highness, Minister of the Interior Count Mono happened to be passing by and asked to pay his respects. Just happened to be passing by. Joseph raised an eyebrow at Imang. The attendant leaned closer. Your Highness, it probably has to do with Guizot. That comment sparked an idea. He was looking for allies in the cabinet. This could be an opportunity to gain some political leverage. He nodded to the guard. Please invite Count Mono to my carriage. Yes, Your Highness. A moment later, a man in his 50s with sharp brown eyes, long wavy hair, and a powdered face appeared. He handed his cane to a servant, bowed deeply. I'm incredibly fortunate to encounter His Royal Highness the Crown Prince here. Joseph returned the courtesy, invited him into the carriage, and gestured to the pastries on the small table. These are from Her Majesty the Queen. Please, try one. Thank you, Your Highness. Mono picked up a pastry with exaggerated delight. As if struck by a sudden thought, he gestured to his servant to bring forward a wooden box. I recently acquired a beautiful knife. It seems perfectly suited to Your Highness's heroic nature. A fitting gift. Oh. Thank you, Count Mono. Mono waited for Joseph to take the box, then feigned a casual tone. A great deal has been happening in Paris lately, Your Highness. Indeed. The actions of some officials are truly regrettable. For a powerful cabinet member, Mono acted surprisingly humble. He sighed. Guizot was once a respectable man, but who knew he would? Joseph opened the wooden box, cutting him off with a smile. Please, speak plainly. Very well. Mono's face was all sincerity. I recommended Guizot based solely on his abilities. I had no idea what he was up to. Had I known, I would have done everything in my power to stop him. Fortunately, Your Highness saw through his vile scheme and averted disaster. Guizot had been his protégé, the one he'd promoted to police chief. He couldn't easily distance himself from such a scandal. Although Mono held a high position, Guizot had been involved with the secret police. He didn't know the specifics and dared not ask the Queen directly. So he'd intercepted the prince on his way back to the palace of Versailles, hoping to get a read on the situation. Your Highness, what exactly is Guizot's crime this time? Joseph seemed engrossed in the gem-encrusted scimitar. He rubbed it thoughtfully. Well, I heard it was inciting a riot. Mono froze. Riot was a serious charge, tantamount to subversion. If proven, he would be implicated. He forced a dry laugh. He wouldn't be that reckless. Really? Joseph set down the scimitar and handed him the confession sitting on the table. The royal police delivered this morning. Guizot directed a large group of thugs to attack the St. Anthony District Police Station. Oh, I happened to be at the police station at the time. Mono scanned the document, breaking into a cold sweat. He didn't believe Guizot had any reason to incite a riot, but based on the evidence, it certainly looked that way. Panicked, he didn't know where to put his hands. He cursed Guizot under his breath and looked at Joseph, pleadingly. Your Highness, is there any chance to mitigate this? Joseph blinked. Some say Guizot was inciting a riot. I'm not so sure. After all, I'm the only one who really knows what happened. Exactly. Mono nodded frantically. Please, explain the true story to Her Majesty the Queen. Oh, we'll get to that later. Joseph picked up the scimitar again, testing its balance. I've been busy trying to prove to my mother that I'm qualified to be the assistant to the Minister of Finance. The sudden shift in topic caught Mono off guard, but he quickly remembered the Crown Prince's proposal at the cabinet meeting. He blurted out, no one is more qualified than Your Highness. At the next cabinet meeting, I'll propose your appointment as assistant to the Minister of Finance. I can also convince Bishop Brian to support you. Brian was the Minister of Finance and Chief Minister, the most powerful figure in the royal government. Chapter 16 New Fashion for Girls. You are listening at novelfull.audio. It's easy to talk to smart people. Joseph smiled, nodding. Guizot probably paid for the murders and protected the criminals. I'll make sure the Queen understands that. Your Highness, you're a true champion of justice. Mono touched his chest in salute. Please know I'll always be loyal to the King and Queen, and to you. I appreciate your loyalty, and your scimitar. I admire it. Mono felt a huge weight lifted. After a bit more conversation, he quickly said his goodbyes and left. Joseph suddenly remembered, the Minister of the Interior managed national municipal affairs and oversaw the police. That meant Mono picked the Paris Police Commissioner. My focus will be finances going forward, so I need someone reliable to handle police reform. Plus, I can use the police department as a front for the intelligence agency I'm planning. He stopped Mono. One more thing. Who's taking over as Paris Police Commissioner? Mono, thinking of the Crown Prince's police reform ideas, replied immediately, "Will definitely value your Highness's opinion." Joseph nodded, satisfied. "Good. I'll offer my advice. And, I'm confident that whatever Guizot did had nothing to do with you. Take care." "Thank you for your trust, your Highness." Mono bowed deeply, took 3 steps back, and turned to leave. Once he was a good 30 feet away, he finally breathed a sigh of relief. He no longer thought the Crown Prince was easily fooled. During their carriage ride, the Crown Prince had taken the lead in the conversation, appearing calm and composed, which unnerved him, just like he felt with Louis XV. He told the coachman to return to the Palace of Versailles, muttering to himself, "He truly is blessed. I need to distance myself from the Duke of Orleans from now on." Joseph resumed his journey. About an hour later, the melodious sound of a trombone, accompanied by rhythmic drumming, drifted toward them. Imang quietly said, "Your Highness, we're here." The carriage stopped. 2 unfamiliar nobles approached. One opened the door and bowed, waiting for the Crown Prince to exit, while the other placed a wooden step stool in front of the door. "Welcome back, Your Highness." Joseph stepped out, nodded to the 2 men, and looked ahead. He saw hundreds of honor guards in uniform lined up on both sides, raising their swords. In the marble courtyard in front of the Palace of Versailles main entrance, hundreds of nobles were gathered, crowding the steps, all eagerly looking his way. When they saw the Crown Prince, they cheered, drowning out the band. Joseph was surprised. "What's all this?" The nobles quickly explained, "Your Highness, the King and Queen are personally welcoming you." Joseph sighed inwardly. This is like returning from a major victory. Louis XVI had been consumed with playing with locks ever since taking the throne. He hasn't done much to distinguish himself. The Queen was just okay and barely keeping up with the government. Plus, rumors of her extravagance had damaged the royal family's reputation. Now, the Crown Prince had made a splash, throwing the Paris police chief in jail and wiping out nearly all the criminals in the Saint-Antoine district in one fell swoop. It was the talk of the town. With such an impressive son, Louis XVI and the Queen were making a big deal out of it, hence, this unprecedented welcoming ceremony. Many nobles, not important enough to be in the marble courtyard, were waiting anxiously inside the Palace of Versailles. Joseph walked between the honor guards and looked up. At the top of the steps stood an elegant woman, wearing a purple silk dress with a wide hem, a white mink shawl, and long feathers in her elaborate updo. Queen Mary, next to her, partially hidden behind her, was a somewhat nervous, chubby, and pale man wearing a long blue velvet coat embroidered with fine silver threads, a black tricorn hat, and black calfskin high-heeled shoes. The King of France, famous locksmith, and social anxiety sufferer, Louis XVI, Joseph quickened his pace, walking towards them. As he walked, the nobles on either side bowed. At the main entrance of the Palace of Versailles, it looked like a colorful wave was slowly rising up the stairs. Just as Queen Mary smiled warmly and opened her arms to welcome her son, a noblewoman in a low-cut dress to Joseph's right seemed to freeze. She went pale and started to fall forward. Joseph instinctively reached out to support her. "Are you all right?" he asked, concerned. The girl closed her eyes, shivering in his arms. The surrounding noblewomen's eyes flashed with annoyance. They secretly gritted their teeth. Elisa, that witch. Using such cheap tricks to get close to the Crown Prince. The former Crown Prince had been mediocre, even a bit useless. Although he had a prestigious title, his reputation among noblewomen had been poor. But now, stories of the Crown Prince's brilliance, like his knowledge, stunned Lagrange. He cleaned up the criminals in the Saint-Antoine district in 2 days, and he solved a murder case in 3 minutes, had become legendary among the women at the Palace of Versailles. Talking about the Crown Prince and finding out as much as they could about him had become a trend among young women. He was almost all they talked about. The Son of God had suddenly become every girl's dream man. Even if they knew marriage was impossible, being his lover was enough. The tall girl on the left thought, "I can do that too." She tossed her fan to the ground and whispered, "My corset is so tight, I can't breathe." She leaned towards the Crown Prince. Joseph quickly caught her with his left hand. The air suddenly filled with jealousy. Whispers of "I'm so cold and I suddenly feel dizzy" echoed. A dozen women practically fell towards him as Joseph was wondering what to do. The guard Captain Quixote stepped forward, picked up the two girls, and shouted, "Guards, help these ladies." "Yes, sir." The unconscious noblewomen peeked open their eyes, saw the tall and burly guards rushing toward them, and miraculously recovered. They stood upright, looking dignified and composed. Chapter 17 Aspirin Youth Edition. You are listening at novelfull.audio. "Honey, you're back." Queen Mary curtsied to Joseph, then pulled him into a tight hug. "I've been missing you like crazy. Are you hurt? Goodness, you've lost weight. From now on, make sure you take a chef with you when you travel." Louis XVI approached, but observing the crowd, he remained silent, offering his son only an encouraging glance. "Come inside, it's freezing out here." The Queen ushered Joseph into the palace of Versailles. Glancing at the colorful entourage behind him, she whispered to her son, "Joseph, you're at the age where we should be thinking about an engagement. Which princess catches your eye? The Spanish princess? Or maybe someone from Savoy?" Joseph was taken aback. Engagement? He was barely a teenager, this was moving way too fast. He quickly turned to Louis XVI, changing the subject. "Father, what about your salamander spray?" Louis XVI, seemingly ignoring the surrounding people, asked, "Joseph, just pick a girl you like. Even if she's not a princess, I'll back you all the way." Queen Mary gave him a helpless look, then took her son's hand. "Sweetheart, I've even planned a grand ball in your honor." She stopped abruptly. "Why are your hands so hot?" She touched his forehead. "Good heavens, you have a fever." Turning to a maid, she called out, "Debenec, fetch Dr. Lamarck, quickly." "Your Majesty, Dr. Lamarck left for Paris this morning." "Then Dr. Rasseni." "Hurry." Queen Mary kissed her son's burning forehead, nearly in tears. "From now on, you must always have a doctor with you when you travel." Joseph felt a surge of warmth and tried to reassure her, "It's just a slight fever, I'm okay." He coughed as he spoke. "You call that okay? You're clearly sick. Go rest immediately and let the doctor examine you." Hearing that the crown prince was ill, the girls nearby rushed to his side, almost carrying him, along with the queen, to the palace. After Joseph was settled on the velvet bed, the queen glared at Louis XVI, her eyes conveying, "If you were half the man the Sun King was, our son wouldn't have to work so hard for the country." Shortly after, a short, middle-aged doctor, panting, entered the room. At the Queen's insistence, he took Joseph's temperature and examined him thoroughly. He then leaned in, addressing the Queen and Louis XVI, "Your Majesties, the Crown Prince has pneumonia. It's quite serious, a fever of 102. I recommend immediate bloodletting. Then do it, and be quick about it." Joseph's face paled. Bloodletting? With his slight build, he'd be drained in no time. He didn't blame the doctor, medicine at that time was closer to barbering than science. Bloodletting was a common practice. After all, a few years later, even George Washington would be bled to death. He pretended to be uncomfortable, wanting only peace, and dismissed all the visitors, including the king and queen. Once the bedroom door closed, he jumped out of bed and told Dr. Larsini, "No bloodletting. No matter how sick I get, I absolutely forbid it." "But Your Highness, that's impossible." Joseph tried to reason with him, but seeing the doctor remain stubborn, he reluctantly grabbed the Persian scimitar Mono had given him from the table, saying in a serious tone, "I won't repeat myself. No bloodletting. Understand?" The blade's glint made Larsini's eyes widen. He recalled the crown prince's fearsome reputation, chasing down half of Paris and capturing the chief of police single-handedly. Leading 90 guards and hundreds of gang members in battle, wiping out every murderer. Yes, that was the story. After being told and retold a million times, Larsini gulped and nodded quickly. "As you wish, Your Highness." He added cautiously, "But, you still have a fever." Joseph felt dizzy and weak. He wished he had penicillin, a powerful tool against pneumonia, but that wasn't something easily obtained. Were there any fever reducers he could make quickly? He suddenly recalled a documentary about aspirin, which detailed the extraction of salicin, an earlier version of aspirin. Fortunately, he had a good memory and remembered the key steps. While salicin had only a mild anti-inflammatory effect, it was an excellent fever reducer and relatively easy to produce. He looked at Versailles. "Are you familiar with drug preparation?" The doctor's face lit up. "Yes, Your Highness, I studied it in college." "Perfect." Joseph grabbed pen and paper, wrote down the salicin preparation process, and explained it in detail. Crush the willow bark and dry it. Add a small amount of quicklime, then soak it in an alkaline alcohol solution for half an hour. Boil, filter, evaporate, and concentrate. Adjust the extract to alkaline, soak again, repeat, until crystals form. That's about it. How long will it take to make? Larcini's eyes were wide with amazement. The Crown Prince's expertise was equal to his own. Truly a remarkable young man. They discussed the process in detail, ensuring nothing was missed. Then Larcini said, "The necessary equipment is available in the Royal Alchemy Laboratory. If all goes well, it can be completed by 4 this afternoon." "Your Highness, with all due respect, I've never heard of this medicine. Are you sure it's safe?" "Positive." Joseph nodded. "Just do it. Also, don't tell my parents I didn't have bloodletting." "This, very well, Your Highness." Exhausted from the fever and the work, Joseph soon fell asleep. Sometime later, he felt a soft hand on his forehead. He struggled to open his eyes and saw light green eyes as clear as a lake and a gracefully curved nose. Joseph recoiled slightly, recognizing the girl as being around 17 or 18. She wore tawny lipstick, a thick white wig, a men's dark green hunting suit, and black trousers, looking like a mischievous girl who had raided her father's closet. "Your Highness, I'm sorry to wake you." The girl curtsied and then turned, saying, "Dr. Lamarck, His Highness has a high fever." A middle-aged man with styled hair, wearing a simple, light gray coat, a thin face, a prominent nose, and light green eyes, approached and gestured. "Perna, take His Highness's temperature." "Yes, doctor." Dr. Lamarck bowed to Joseph, then checked the sleeves of both arms, frowning. "Your Highness, Larceny told me he performed bloodletting, but clearly, he wasn't truthful." Joseph sat up, feeling dizzy. Perna supported him, whispering, "Your Highness, please open your mouth and don't bite." Drowsily, Joseph opened his mouth and she placed a thick glass thermometer inside. 10 minutes later, Perna removed the thermometer and looked at Lamarck with concern. Doctor, 101. Chapter 18 Lamarck's Shock. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Lamarck immediately pulled a knife and a copper basin from his suitcase. "Get ready to bleed the Crown Prince, Perna." Joseph said flatly, "Absolutely not. I forbid you to bleed me." Lamarck, seeing Joseph's weakness, replied sternly, "Your Highness, I have to. A fever for too long can have serious consequences." Joseph struggled, trying to reach for his scimitar. Lamarck added, "If you refuse treatment, I'll report it to the Queen." Joseph felt a wave of dizziness. Just as he was trying to figure out how to persuade this stubborn doctor, Versailles came in holding a glass bottle. "Your Highness, here's what you wanted." Versailles seemed a little sheepish, handing over the bottle. "Maybe the purification isn't quite perfect." Joseph looked at the bottle's gray, viscous contents, opened the cap, and immediately smelled alcohol. He smiled ruefully to himself. Not quite was an understatement. Still, he reassured the doctor, "This is your first time, so it's already great." "Thank you." As Joseph was about to take the salicin, a thought struck him. He looked at Lamarck. "Mr. Lamarck, if I let you bleed me, how long will it take for my fever to break?" Lamarck considered for a moment. "Maybe tonight, maybe tomorrow morning." Joseph held up the bottle. With my medicine, the fever can be down in an hour. Lamarck felt his professional pride stung. He shook his head. Your Highness, you have pneumonia that's out of control. There's no medicine I know of that can lower a fever that fast. He was an academician of the French Academy of Sciences, a famous European biologist and medical scientist, the one who proposed the theories of biological evolution and natural selection, one of France's top doctors. He was confident in his assessment. Joseph smiled wearily. Then let's make a bet. If my fever breaks within an hour, you can't bleed me again. Ever. Lamarck was slightly taken aback, then nodded confidently. All right, Your Highness. But if your medicine doesn't work, you can't refuse any treatment from me in the future. Deal. Joseph poured out a spoonful of the salicin and swallowed it. It was intensely bitter and reeked of alcohol, making him gag. Lamarck carefully pulled out his pocket watch. Your Highness, it's 4:21 p.m. Joseph nodded. He wanted to sleep, but having 3 people, including a girl, watching him felt awkward. So, he simply sat up and started discussing the purification of salicin with Receni. When Lamarck heard the medicine was made from willow bark, he couldn't help but shake his head. The British had researched willow bark's effects over a decade ago. It did reduce fever, but it took days of continuous use to work, plus, it was brutal on the stomach. Many people gave up because of stomach cramps before the fever broke. However, he was impressed by the Crown Prince's knowledge of experimental theory, which surpassed even his own students. If the Crown Prince dedicated himself to medicine or experimental science, he could achieve great things. In reality, Joseph was just a novice who'd picked up a little knowledge from a chemistry student back in his university dorm. But in the 18th century, it sounded incredibly advanced. So, precipitation and cooling can speed things up. Joseph suddenly stopped mid-sentence, rubbed his forehead, and smiled at Lamarck. Mr. Lamarck, my fever seems to be gone. Lamarck had been engrossed in Joseph's explanation of the experiment and had almost forgotten about the bet. He quickly checked his pocket watch. It was 4:58 p.m., just 37 minutes after the Crown Prince took the medicine. He looked at Joseph again, noting a sparkle in his eyes. He bowed slightly and reached out to touch his forehead. Sure enough, it wasn't hot anymore. Perna, the thermometer. Lamarck grabbed the thermometer and stuck it in the Crown Prince's mouth. After a moment, he pulled it out and checked it himself, his eyes wide with disbelief. 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit. His temperature was back to normal. How is this possible? He muttered, grabbing Joseph's shoulders excitedly. Your Highness, what you just drank was really willow bark extract. Joseph smiled and nodded. I never expected the purification to make it so potent. Lamarck's eyes seemed to sparkle. Your Highness, if this drug's efficacy is consistent, it could be revolutionary. May I trial produce it? Of course. Mr. Receni will tell you the exact process. I can't thank you enough. Lamarck bowed deeply to Joseph. He hurriedly pulled out his notebook and sought out Receni, then turned back to ask, Your Highness, did you invent this medicine? Well. Joseph hesitated, then said, it must have been divine inspiration. Oh, my God. Lamarck was stunned. Was His Highness truly blessed to conceive of such a potion through mere inspiration? However, with a scientist's rigor, he knew extensive experiments were needed to confirm the drug's effects. Filled with renewed purpose, he pulled Receni toward the alchemy lab, leaving behind the instruction, Perna, monitor His Highness's condition at all times. Tell me immediately if anything changes. Yes, Doctor. 2 days later, Joseph's condition had improved greatly after being treated with salicin. Although he still coughed occasionally, he had not had a fever since, as he entered the gilded doors of the East Palace Conference Hall in the Palace of Versailles, it wasn't even 9 o'clock yet. There were still a few minutes before the cabinet meeting began. The other cabinet ministers had already arrived. When they saw the Crown Prince enter, they all stood and saluted him. Interior Minister Monod even greeted Joseph with a beaming smile, whispering, "Thank you, Your Highness. The order to deal with Guizot was issued yesterday. No mention of inciting a riot." Joseph smiled and gestured for him to sit down. He had mentioned it to the Queen over lunch yesterday, the gist of which was to place all the blame solely on Guizot. The clerk would make a formal report later, sealing the deal. Although Joseph suspected there was more to the Guizot affair, it probably had nothing to do with Monod. Once his intelligence agency was up and running, this would be the first thing they investigated. Monod suddenly stood up, spread his arms, and loudly declared to the room, "The police reform spearheaded by His Royal Highness the Crown Prince has achieved remarkable results. As you all know, the criminals in the St. Anthony district have been all but eradicated. His Highness is truly blessed. Let us all congratulate him." Chapter 19 Assistant to the Chancellor of the Exchequer. You are listening at novelfull.audio. When the cabinet ministers heard this, whatever their private thoughts, they all rose to congratulate the Crown Prince, showering him with praise. Joseph was returning their greetings when the hall's golden doors swung open, and the protocol officer announced, "His Majesty the King and Her Majesty the Queen are here." The ministers were surprised by the king's appearance, as he rarely attended cabinet meetings. They quickly turned to face Louis XVI and Queen Mary as they entered, respectfully touching their chests in salute. Chancellor, being familiar with the ministers, didn't show as much social anxiety. He smiled and said, "You're all so dedicated. So, what's the topic of discussion today?" Monod immediately chimed in, "Your Majesty, we were just commending His Royal Highness the Crown Prince for his outstanding work in reforming the police." Point 16 and the Queen took their seats at the head of the table, their faces beaming. Queen Mary especially couldn't stop talking about Joseph's recent accomplishments. Seeing the atmosphere was right, Monod glanced meaningfully at Joseph, cleared his throat, and stood up. "Your Majesty, the Crown Prince has proven his exceptional abilities during his time at the police station. You may recall saying that if His Highness succeeded at City Hall, he'd be given the position of assistant to the Minister of Finance." Queen Mary nodded with a smile. The Minister of Justice, Sumiel, frowned slightly, glancing at the Duke of Orleans. Seeing that he remained impassive, he pretended to look down, muttering just loud enough for those nearby to hear, "Her Majesty only said the Crown Prince could have access to financial affairs." Queen Mary's smile faltered, her gaze sweeping over the others before settling on Finance Minister Brian. "Archbishop Brian, what are your thoughts on this matter?" Hearing this, Monod gave Joseph a "don't worry" look, implying he'd already spoken to Brian. The round-faced old man sitting at the second table stood and bowed to the Queen. "Your Majesty, I believe His Royal Highness the Crown Prince is fully qualified to serve as assistant to the Minister of Finance." As the Archbishop of Toulouse, the Chief Minister of the Cabinet, and the Minister of Finance, his support carried significant weight. Naturally, no one else voiced opposition. A smile returned to Queen Mary's face, and she was about to announce the appointment when Brian added, "Your Highness, financial matters are critical, and Your Highness has limited experience in this area. Therefore, I must insist on retaining final authority over financial policy. The Crown Prince can't overrule my decisions regarding finances. I hope Your Majesty understands." Joseph sighed inwardly. How worried are you that I'll bankrupt the country? Who else besides me can save your treasury right now? Just as he was considering how to persuade the old man, the Duke of Orleans suddenly stood. "Archbishop Brian, national finance is complex. In the past, the assistant to the finance minister handled many smaller tasks. If you insist on doing everything yourself, it would be a significant distraction. Right now, you should be focused on pushing through the new tax bill, rather than getting bogged down in other details." A hush fell over the room. Everyone was surprised. During the last cabinet meeting, the Duke of Orleans had been at odds with the Crown Prince and they nearly argued. Why would he advocate for him now? Queen Mary looked cautiously at Brian and asked, "What responsibilities does the assistant to the finance minister currently hold?" Mainly dealing with loans and repaying the national debt, as well as organizing some sections of tax bills. The Queen's eyebrows relaxed. These tasks were straightforward. There was a well-established system for managing loans with banks. And she already had her own clerk and lawyer to help with bill organization. Joseph could easily handle these tasks, and it would be a good way for him to gain experience with financial matters. She immediately made up her mind, politely asked Louis XVI a few questions, and announced loudly, "The Crown Prince will assume the responsibilities previously handled by the assistant to the finance minister. All other matters require the approval of Archbishop Bourrienne." Officially, the Crown Prince is appointed as assistant to the Minister of Finance. "Count Barrington, please prepare the official documents." "Yes, Your Majesty." Joseph bowed to acknowledge the order, said a few words, and glanced at the Duke of Orleans out of the corner of his eye, wondering what his game was. Though the Duke of Orleans appeared composed, he was inwardly gloating, knowing that he couldn't prevent Joseph from becoming assistant to the finance minister. Given his recent surge in popularity, he'd started plotting to set him up for a fall a few days earlier. There were 6 million livres in national debt maturing next month. He had already struck a deal with Bank Capital to suspend all loans to the government. He could already imagine the headlines: "Crown Prince's mismanagement leads to government debt default, triggering a fiscal crisis." Queen Mary encouraged her son and turned to Brian. "Please begin with today's agenda." "Yes, Your Majesty." The round-faced old man retrieved the prepared documents, put on his gold-rimmed glasses, and began, "In light of this year's financial revenue and expenditure, I believe we must reduce budget expenditures again in the next 6 months. He looked at Queen Mary, who nodded. "Yes, I have reviewed your report and agree with this proposal. On behalf of the royal family, I wish to announce that the royal family will reduce its annual spending by 1 million livres to ease financial pressure." "Thank you for your Majesty's generosity." Brian then looked at the middle-aged man with a long face and a large nose on the right side of the table. "I recommend that the Navy reduce the construction of 1 battleship and 2 second-class ships, which will save the Treasury 1.35 million livres. The Lord of the Navy, the Marquis of Castries, immediately jumped up from his chair and protested vehemently, "How can we do that? The British fleet is far superior to ours. We need to build 4 more battleships on top of the original plan to maintain our trade routes. Instead of increasing our allocation, you're cutting 1 ship. And 2 second-class ships." Queen Mary asked him to calm down and looked at the other ministers. "What are your opinions?" The majority of them agreed with the cuts. The budget was limited. If they didn't cut the Navy, they'd inevitably have to cut other areas. It was better to cut the Navy. The Marquis of Castries was becoming increasingly agitated, sweating profusely. Seeing that he couldn't count on anyone else, his eyes desperately landed on the Crown Prince. He had heard that the Crown Prince had led his guards to fight with gang members in the St. Anthony district not long ago. He must be a young and vigorous hardliner who would support expanding the military. He turned to Joseph. "Your Highness, do you also agree with Archbishop Brian's reduction plan? That will make us even more vulnerable against the British." "No," Joseph said firmly. "Reducing a battleship is a bad idea." "That's right." The Marquis of Castries had only managed to say 2 words when Joseph's next sentence stunned him. "I think we should shelve all of the Navy's current battleship construction plans." Chapter 20 Budget, Seeking Investment. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Castries' face went pale. "Your Highness, you can't be serious. Our fleet is France's sharpest weapon. We can't just—" Joseph cut him off calmly. "Marquis de Castries, for every warship we build, how many can the British produce?" Castries hesitated. "Well, about 1.5. Seeing the Crown Prince's knowing smile, Castries blurted out, "2. The British are launching new ships at an insane rate, more than 2 for every one of ours." Joseph nodded. "So, no matter how hard we try to build ships, we'll never outpace the British Navy." He stated the obvious, something everyone knew but no one dared to say. and a hush fell over the room. Joseph continued, if that's the case, why waste so much on building ships? If we just need to escort merchant ships, our current fleet is sufficient. He knew the importance of the fleet, and he certainly wasn't opposed to expanding the navy. What he objected to was wasting money on large, useless, old-fashioned sailing battleships. Britain had a huge advantage in shipbuilding. They had more shipyards, more skilled workers, more funding, and being an island nation, they could focus their resources on the navy. France couldn't do that. If they just tried to build more ships, France would definitely lose. The Battle of Trafalgar, a little over a decade later, would prove that even with the combined efforts of France, Spain, and the Netherlands, the British Navy still crushed them. After that, British ships completely choked off French trade routes. The Emperor's power gradually declined, and Britain eventually became the empire on which the sun never sets. So, there was only one way out: abandon the outdated multi-deck sailing warships. Use advanced technology to jump straight to ironclad ships, equip them with steam engines and stronger artillery, and give Britain's warships a rude awakening. But he couldn't reveal those plans at a cabinet meeting. At least not while Orleans was likely to leak the information. But Castries knew the Crown Prince was playing devil's advocate, but he couldn't find a good counterargument. He was worried the Queen would take the Prince's words to heart and halt construction on the new ships. Briand gave Joseph an approving look. This kid gets it, he thought. And since he's new to the job, maybe he'll be a good ally in my budget-cutting plans. He cleared his throat dramatically. Your Highness, although our finances are tight, we can't give up on naval development entirely. Cutting one battleship is the absolute limit. Mono chimed in, our overseas colonies need warships for protection. Otherwise, we'll have constant uprisings. Finally, Queen Mary weighed in, Joseph, you can't cut too deeply. Marquis de Castries, for now, we'll go with Archbishop Briand's plan and reduce one battleship and 2 second-rate ships. But review the costs of the other new ships carefully. We need to eliminate all unnecessary spending. Castries felt like his naval dreams were sinking. He nodded weakly. Yes, Your Majesty. He sighed inwardly. The Crown Prince is young and doesn't understand the importance of the navy. He just wants to cut costs. I need to talk to him and change his mind. Briand, having successfully tackled the navy, felt relieved. He moved on to the next item. I believe everyone is aware of the situation in the Netherlands. The Patriot Party was crushed by the Prussians in less than a month. Given this, I propose we discontinue aid to the Dutch Patriot Party, saving the treasury 250,000 livres each month. Joseph frowned, recalling the details of the Dutch Patriot movement. This was an uprising by Dutch merchants and citizens to overthrow William V. With French funding, they had succeeded in ousting William V and establishing a provincial assembly. Later, at the urging of William V's wife, Princess Wilhelmina of Prussia, Prussian troops intervened. The Patriot Party was defeated, William V was reinstated, and all of France's initial investment was for nothing. The cabinet ministers agreed to cut off aid to the Dutch rebels. With 20,000 Prussian troops in the Netherlands, the Patriot Party didn't stand a chance. It was best to cut their losses. Queen Mary looked around. Any other comments? I have one, Joseph announced, standing up. Minister of War Saint Priest had hoped to keep the funding going a little longer, having invested a lot in the Netherlands. Seeing the Crown Prince speak up, he felt a chill. Given his recent cuts to the navy, the prince was probably anti-war. And since the Queen adored him, the Dutch aid was as good as gone. Joseph said, Your Majesty, I believe we shouldn't just continue aid to the Patriot Party, but increase it. We should even create the impression that we might send troops to Prussia. We can't let the Patriot Party fall. Oh. The Queen was surprised. Explain. First, the Netherlands controls the Rhine River. Holding it would allow us to effectively contain Prussia. Second, the Netherlands has a thriving economy. We can recoup our aid through trade alone if we bring them under our control. Finally, we know we'll be at war with Prussia in the future, and the Netherlands can tie up a large number of Prussian troops in the west. If Prussia controls the Netherlands, all these advantages will become their gains. Joseph had two more points he kept to himself. First, the Netherlands had large coal and iron deposits. With the Industrial Revolution kicking off, whoever had more coal and iron would have a huge advantage. Second, the Patriots were masters of stirring up trouble. If Prussia drove them out of the Netherlands, they'd flock to France and likely cause trouble. Joseph's words were met with strange looks from the cabinet ministers. What the Crown Prince said made sense, but he had just opposed building warships, and now he was supporting aid to the Dutch, even suggesting a war with Prussia. Could it be? They lowered their heads, trying not to think about the worst-case scenario. Brian spoke first. Your Highness, our finances don't allow us to give the Dutch more money. Joseph countered, didn't we just save a lot on building a warship? Give them some of that. Admiral Castries almost cried with gratitude. Thank you, Your Highness. The Minister of War felt a surge of joy. Thank you so much, Your Highness. Well. Brian was relieved that he still controlled the purse strings. Queen Mary jumped to his rescue. Joseph, your points are well taken, but even with more aid, the Patriot Party might not be able to stop the Prussian army.